Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So let's get back to kind of our standard fare here as far as the videos are concerned. We're going to talk about a simple one here. Got a little bit of a window in between some meetings, so let me get this one recorded. This one's going to be a little bit more streamlined, so we won't have to spend too much time on it, but a little history lesson I think is useful in order before we get back to present day. So I want to kind of reference something here and then we'll get into the current. Specifically, what I want to refer to is our good friends over at Collectible, and specifically fractional ownership. And for those of you who haven't been around the channel too long, you'll know that I have from time to time come back and revisited the whole fractional ownership space and brought about a couple of different concerns and a little kind of questions that I have about the whole fractional space and some of the challenges it creates for us in trying to figure certain things out. But one of them really comes down to kind of what we've got here on the screen. So we've got the Collectible website here. Now, at the end of the day, this isn't going to be a video trying to judge whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I leave that up to you. That's really your own deal. But I'll repost some of the previous challenges that I brought up, and then we'll talk about the current posting that kind of got me to making this video. Even though it was a couple of days ago, I still want to talk about it. Now, on the website here, you can see all the different things. If you're not familiar with it, it's a fractional ownership application. You can go on the app and you can buy quote unquote shares in some of these different cards or different memorabilia and items because it's an emerging asset class. And again, I'll leave most of the commentary on that of whether you like it or don't like it. That's up to you. But I want to talk about something specific. And right here, we've got a Baltimore Babe Ruth, 1914 Babe Ruth card. And this is actually going to come up here in a second. So it's perfect that it happens to be on the front of the website. Now, again, for those of you who haven't been around a while, I have talked about these guys from time to time. Now, back in October of 2020, what I actually did is I was on a live stream where I was discussing some of the challenges and questions that I had regarding that. And one of the ones that I brought up was pertaining to the offering that they had at that time. They were actually offering a 1953 Topps Mickey Mantle PSA 10, which is obviously a fantastic card, but they were offering it for an IPO price, which would have come out to about $2.5 million valuation. And at the time, my challenge was based on the way they got to that comp. And what they actually did at the time, again, quick refresher for those of you that don't remember or are not familiar, basically what they did is they took the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle and they tried to do a comparison. So right there in and of itself, obviously there's a lot of things you can challenge there. They're not the same. The 52 Topps Mantle is an iconic card. The 53 Topps is an awesome card and one that is a personal favorite, but they're not apples to apples, even though it's the same player, early 50s, Topps, all that. But what they tried to do, which actually made it more complex and what I challenged even at the time, was they were trying to create a comp by saying, well, if the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle, if one of the Pop 3, if one of the three PSA 10s came into the market, they had some, they believed based on their expert testimony, they may as well have just said studies, they ran studies, but based on their expert testimony, they believed that it could go for as much as $25 million. Now, this is a comp based on pure conjecture and nothing else. It's basically you just guessing. It could have, I threw out at the time that it's like, why 25? Why not 50? Why not 15? Who knows? The only way you would know is to put it out in an open auction and see what happens and see who is willing to put the money down. But the point is that based on that, they then backtracked and tried to work out the comparable where they said to themselves, okay, so if we think this is worth 25 million, even though again, there's nothing to base that on other than guessing. So then the 53 Topps could maybe be 10% of that. Therefore, $2.5 million valuation. Sounds great. So in the end, they were successful in that they were able to fill the IPO and then they were able to sell the card for about $3 million, maybe 3.1 if memory serves me. It's been a little while. But regardless, the people that bought those shares at the IPO price were able to make a little bit of money, but nothing that I'd write home about. But I would just point out that they were able to get away with it at the time because they were able to at least do it. And the market was running pretty hot, so it worked out for them. Regardless, though, my contention was still always how you arrived at this comp and how you made up this price. Because honestly, I can't call it anything else except you made a price up. You came up with a justification after the fact. You really had to contort yourself into a pretzel to come up with it, but you made it up. There's nothing there to compare it to really that is solid. Now, to be fair, quick caveat here. Anytime you're trying to build a comp, it's not an exact science, no matter what. Even if you have comparable cards and everything like that, especially if you're talking in the vintage realm and those things, it's not an exact science. It's more of an art form because even if you're trying to operate, especially if you're trying to operate in the vintage realm, eye appeal has just as much to do with anything else. You can have the same kind of graded card and have them in different types of holders, and that may affect the price. It could just be a matter of timing that could affect the price. So you could have a sale of something and then rerun the exact same card in a different scenario and get a completely different outcome. So it's one of those things where those comps are, again, very fluid. They can go up and down depending on what's going on. So it's a little bit trickier. With modern, it tends to be a little bit more stable because if you are doing something that is apples to apples and you're not trying to do a 52 tops to 53 tops comparison, some reverse math, and try to make some guesses, if you're not trying to do all that, you can have a certain consistency, at least within a certain range, an acceptable range. But it's not an exact science no matter how you slice it. There's a little bit of guessing and a little bit of art as far as that's concerned. Regardless, when you're trying to do this, the more exact you can be and the more solid the base of your comparables is, the better off you're going to be. Using a different year of a different product is not going to work very well, but there are other ways you can also have an issue. Now, one of the other challenges I brought, because again, I've talked about this from time to time, the second time around, I brought up the challenge about potential additional series and how that can affect the pricing, and that actually came up with the 1914 Baltimore Ruth, and I brought that up on this video here. Something else to consider for the 1914 Ruth sale, and where I challenged the whole idea behind, how they arrived at the price, and what you can see is I highlighted there, where Ursula Levine at the time told Sports Collectors Daily, "I would not be surprised if we do additional sales of shares of the card over time." So just as a refresher, as a reminder, another wrinkle that Fractional can do is you can initially have an initial public offering, an IPO, and then down the road potentially do another series of shares, which is something I posed all the way back in October of 2020, which then was brought up again in June of 2021 in this article when I was doing this video. And the fact of the matter is, it meant that there's a lot of different shifting around that you could do where you could end up with different price points at different series, and all those possibilities became suddenly open. That's what some of the complexity that Fractional has brought into this. And again, it leaves us with this problem like, so what's the thing actually worth? The idea that, oh, well, we're letting the market decide. Well, no, you're really not. You're playing games as far as how we're arriving at this destination, because when you introduce a second series, that means additional shares. Are they comparable to the first series of shares? Are they all trading exactly the same? Do you start off at a different price, or do you go with the current market price? All these things can mess around with the idea of what this is worth, because somebody could theoretically do an IPO with an inflated valuation, sell only a portion of the card, get all their money out. Now they're all in the black, and the rest of it's just gravy. If they happen to sell the card at whatever the inflated market price is now, well then fantastic, you win. This background is just to give you the basis upon which now we're going to talk about what brought it into the present day. So we talked about it in 2020, I talked about it in 2021, and now in 2022, here we are again. So here's CardPorn, and CardPorn is posting about this card here, a BGS 7.5 2017 Panini Flawless Shield Signatures Patrick Mahomes card. The initial price on Golden was $312,000, so they do include a screenshot of this here. So you can see, in 2021, it was sold for $312,000. This is a one of one. So let's remember that. My challenge on the original one was that we were talking about two different cards. In this case, we're going to talk about the exact same card, because this one has been proposed to be brought up for collectible as an IPO. And what they've done is they want to put it into a fractional price of $1.99 million, so just shy of $2 million, with 47.7 retained equity. So we're playing a little game where they paid $312,000 and they want to sell a little over 50% of it for the equivalent of an overall valuation of 1.9 million, which is to say you want to make $1 million on selling half of a thing you paid $312,000 for. You with me so far? I know it's very confusing. But the important part that I want to focus on is, okay, so how did we arrive with 1.99 million? How do we arrive with just shy of $2 million when we're talking about the exact same card? This is a one of one. There is no comp. This is it. This is the card. The comp price is $312,000. How did we arrive at $2 million? And that really is the crux of this question. And this is the ultimate, next step as far as the whole, making up comps kind of situation. So that's why the title is going to be basically Collectible Making Up Comps. It's really not clickbait. It's basically me just pointing out kind of the inherent issue with them using these nebulous means by which to develop these IPO valuation prices. And this is probably the most egregious example I can give you out of the ones that I've just talked about. So let's scroll down a little bit into the comments. I know a lot of different folks had some strong opinions, but I want to really fixate and focus on one specific one. So it's going to take me a second here. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. And it's actually from Ezra Levine. It is the CEO of Collectibles. So not just anybody random here. We want to focus in on the specific individual who has at least, I would say, the most to say as far as this specific case. Okay, so it actually took me a fair bit of scrolling. Thankful. I do enjoy the Instagram platform, but it's not the best for finding specific comments. So I'm going to read you a little bit of this one. This is from Ezra Levine pertaining to this specific card. So let's read a little bit about it, and then we'll finish off with some commentary and some thoughts on this. So, hi all. Wanted to jump in here personally. I'm Ezra Levine, CEO of Collectible. Read the Mahomes specifically tricky asset to price. I agree with that. But we'll get into that here in a second. True 1 of 1 and largely considered the second best NFL Shield Mahomes card on the market. That's, open for debate, but I could get behind it. Best vertical shield, again, open for debate, but sure. The NTRPA, as many of you know, sold in 2021 for $4.3 million after the last comp on this Mahomes. Prices of 1 of 1s can be hotly debated, and it's ultimately worth what someone or a group of people are willing to pay. That is 100% true, that latter portion specifically. The beauty of Fractional is that hundreds of people have to agree on a price to make the offering work, not just one. That's a bit of a cop-out, but I understand his point. The card is open to early access, and we're testing market demand for it at this price, just like we do nearly every item. The majority go to IPO and fill, but not all do. For the ones that don't fill, Collectible promptly returns the money raised to collected investors, and the item is promptly returned back to the consignor. We'll listen closely to market, as we always do. If there's insufficient demand, the item will be pulled from the platform. Two other things worth noting. We're actively exploring ways to let the market price these items off the bat instead of Collectible's team pricing, which would probably be better for this kind of thing. While Collectible is still involved in directly pricing these, we are finalizing a new process for valuations to ensure pricing is as sharp as possible at the time of offering. We're always looking to chat with the community to find ways to improve our product and processes. Now, Ezra Levine's statement here is perfectly fine from the perspective of trying to position this in the nicest possible way, but it doesn't get past the fact that they came up with this comp, they came up with this number, and they're saying it's tricky to price, which I agree 100%. And they're using this NTRPA as kind of this concept is like, again, it goes back to what I said earlier with that 53 tops Mickey Mantle example versus the 52. Yes, they're both Mickey Mantle cards. Yes, they're both very expensive Mickey Mantle cards, especially in high grade, and fairly tough to come by, especially in high grade. But they're not comparable. They're not the same kind of thing. It's like just happens to be pulling a different kind of card is not necessarily going to help you price this. Again, it goes back to my initial section there with my preamble, is that this is not an exact science. I understand that. But simply finding another Patrick Mahomes 1 of 1 and being like, okay, so let's work on a fraction of this and work our way backwards and then try to figure out what a price is, and here you go. Is not the best way to do this. Now, I grant you that no matter how we want to position this, the problem with Fractional is that you have to come up with a comp in the first place. And you have to come up with a comp that is acceptable to the consignor regardless. Because if you say, okay, well, imagine if you were conservative and you were fair. This is not dissimilar to what happens inside of an auction where the auction house tries to find an estimated final value. They're guessing. But they're usually trying to err on the side of conservative, while at the same time not trying to be so conservative that it influences the potential bidders. They want the bidders to believe there's some value here. And they want either some to feel like they're getting a bargain, or others feel like, hey, this is an aggressive price. So you don't want to go too high, and you don't want to go too low, and you don't want to be too far off the final result all the time. You want to at least be close on a couple. But in a situation like this, we've got a 1 of 1. We've got a player who has a lot of potential still, and is still a young player, relatively speaking. But it would be hard to argue that the Patrick Mahomes market is hotter in May of 2022 than it was back in 2021 when the Golden auction happened. And if this card was to go into open market right now, what would it sell for? And I don't know what the answer is to that. But here's the question, and this is kind of the way I would position this. What if you put it up for open auction and it sold for $500,000 or $600,000? That to me would seem like a pretty decent return on investment. But it falls well and woefully short of 1.99 million. Now, the fact is with Fractional, 1.99 million in and of itself isn't necessarily what they're looking to get as far as the final value of it is. If you're selling it for 1.99 million as far as a Fractional, and that's your valuation, and you're able to get people to buy into it, what you've done in effect is you've generated $1 million worth of value, or nearly $1 million worth of value, out of $312,000 without completely relinquishing ownership of the card, which is to say you can have your cake and eat it too. So I can understand from their perspective, their hope, crossing their fingers that they can get this to fill. And for the individuals involved, maybe you can find some sucker down the road to pay over $2 million for it and make it profitable for everybody. But that's the problem, is that you're basically trying to manufacture this demand and this price point that there's nothing else to back up. There's nothing else to stand behind it. And the question would be, what would happen if we went to open auction with this thing? Would we come anywhere close to that figure? Would we be closer to the first number, or would we be closer to the second number? The bottom line, though, is this is in effect how Fractional and a company like Collectible has manufactured a comp. Because if they're able to fill, then that means at least a certain segment of the market is willing to consider this a nearly $2 million card, even though it was a $312,000 card a year ago. And even though the market, we all tend to agree in different videos and different avenues, has cooled down since then. The Patrick Mahomes market cannot possibly be hotter right now than it was a year ago. And all of these things put together, and yet we've managed to almost 6x the value on paper of this specific card. And that is the magic and power of Fractional, so to speak. Anyway, just wanted to lay out some thoughts about that. Like I said, I have talked about this before, and we will talk about it again when we feel it's appropriate. But my bottom line here is stuff like this does warrant some scrutiny. It does warrant some questions. Now, quick point as well. They have every right to ask whatever they want. It's the same way as if somebody goes up on eBay and, if they had if they own this card and put it up on eBay and asked for $2 million, that's their right. They can put a $2 million for best offer. That's completely up to them. The market will then decide. But this is a situation where you're trying to play a little bit of a game where you're not asking anybody for $2 million. You're asking a potential series of investors to give a relatively nominal amount, thinking that, oh, well, we're getting part ownership of this. But in aggregate, if we add you all up, you're basically agreeing to a $2 million valuation, a $2 million comp that has never existed before this moment in time. So if they were able to fill it, you've effectively created this vision. It's a mirage of this sudden increase in price, 6x, even in a slowing market. Well, if they manage to pull this one off, I'll tip my cap to them. But at the same time, why on earth, if you're holding a high-end card like this, would you not pursue a similar type of arrangement? Sell half the card, double, triple, quintuple the valuation, and hey, go to town and you get your money back. You get to have your cake and eat it too, and still retain some ownership of the card. Sounds like a good deal to me. But anyway, just like to get some of your thoughts on this. Again, I suspect more of this kind of thing will still be happening going forward, but it's one of those things you just got to keep your eyes open at it and just kind of look at it a little bit of side-eyed. Anyway, open to thoughts and comments on this one. More videos coming up on the channel. Live streams on Fridays, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, where we talk about anything related to the hobby, anything going on. It could be this or anything else. Other than that, thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.